I'm trying to get further.
110-4.
309-10-4.
It wasn't my shift to work. I actually got a phone call on Saturday evening at about 6:30, and they asked if I would like to come in at 3 because a night shift person had called in sick. So I came in at 3.
It was about over halfway done with a shift, and I just taken my lunch break, and it seemed like a routine, ordinary Friday night, Saturday morning, and then it happened.
309. 305 start that way. 301 or 309.
A routine night that turned out to be anything but routine.
It's a date that I don't typically willingly think about.
I was still on my feet when I heard a pop, and my first thought was, what was that? And then as we went to the ground, I then figured out he was firing a weapon.
All available units start that way. 410 East 12.
10-4.
109, can you advise 310-2?
A day that left numerous lives shattered, one man dead, and 2 officers inches from death.
and 309, 10.
For Justin King and Brenda Walleen, it had been a normal night on the overnight shift.
It was a home that was a 2-level apartment, downstairs tenant, upstairs tenant.
And the call they received from dispatch.
109, start for possible burglary in progress at 410 East 12th Street. Possibly someone who broke into the upstairs, and they're currently in there right now.
Appeared to be nothing out of the ordinary.
The top apartment was supposed to be vacant, and the neighbor downstairs called and said someone had broken into the apartment upstairs and there were multiple people inside.
This is the first and only interview Justin King and Brenda Walleen have given about the night that altered their lives forever. They responded to a call that went from typical to deadly in less than 30 minutes.
Myself and Officer Walleen, we arrived just about at the same time, and we approached the house from the north side. It was dark out, but we could see a light shining outside from the top floor of that apartment.
The officers made their way around to the side of the house and toward the only entrance to the upstairs.
As we were approaching the house, one of us stepped on something, made a sound, and we saw a head peek out of that back door.
The suspects knew they had been caught.
A female kind of poked her head through the little entryway, and we asked her to open the door, and she was reluctant to do so, so Justin kind of pushed on the door, and it wasn't moving well. There was a refrigerator that someone had pushed up against that door.
She tried going back inside, and that was kind of when we grabbed a hold of her and said, don't go anywhere.
That was the beginning of what would become a violent encounter.
Once we get inside the apartment, we find another female inside. We're trying to get the story from them. It's not really making a whole lot of sense why they were there. They were saying that their friend had lived there, and she didn't live there anymore, but she still had stuff there, and they were there to retrieve some items, some personal items and belongings.
But that story didn't hold up.
The back door, the one that we entered to get inside, it had a broken lock. It had a refrigerator in the way, trying to block access to it. So we knew they weren't there for any legitimate reason.
We asked if they were there alone, and they told us that they were. And talking to them and starting to get their information, we could hear shuffling coming from a back room. And so I kind of stood in the doorway where I had eyes on Justin, but I could still keep an eye on the 2 females.
As the women's story began to unravel,
I had heard something get knocked over in a room somewhere further in the apartment. I looked at one of them and I said, "Who else is in here?" And they both looked down at their feet.
Officer King was forced to make a move that would prove deadly for one of the people in that room.
I pulled him out of the room and I was trying to get the story from him, why he was there, who he was, what was going on. And he was being very evasive to me. He lied to me about his name. He gave me a name. I ran it through our system, through our dispatcher, didn't come back. He gave me a different name. And at this point, I know something's going on. The entire time, his hands were in his front pockets. Through my experience, I know a lot of times they're trying to hide something.
And I was continued speaking with the females, and there's 3 channels on our radio, and he was on channel 3 checking his status with his name and birth date. And I was trying to listen to what he was saying, and I heard Justin say, "You're not providing me accurate information."
That's when the situation inside that duplex went from bad to worse.
I said, "Hey, look, you're lying to me about who you are. That's very clear to me. What's going to end up happening is you're going to go to jail and you're going to sit there until we can identify you." And it was at that moment that he bolted. He tried to run out the back door where Officer Wallane was with the 2 females. And that's when the fight started between everybody.
And he came running towards me, so I grabbed hold of him, and Justin was right behind him, and a physical encounter ensued. We began fighting with him in the kitchen.
I remember Officer Wallane blocked the exit. I chased after him. I grabbed a hold of him. He turned around, he started swinging. He hit me probably 12 or 13 times in the face. My goal isn't to fight back. My goal is to get him in custody, gain control of his arms.
Got him partially to the ground, and the next thing I know, he popped up from under Justin and ran to where there was a door entryway, and that's where Justin tackled him to the ground.
He was facing away from me. I was behind him, had my arms locked around his waist. And I tried essentially doing a wrestling takedown to him. I tried lifting him up, but he was wrapping his leg around my leg. And so I remember pushing him forward, and we both fell forward. There was something in our way. We broke through something. It was in the kitchen area. I've been concussed before. I know what it feels like. I know that's what had happened to me. So we were still fighting, and it was not going the way we wanted it to. It's very dangerous. There's still 2 females in that room, and I'm still trying to gain control of this guy who is obviously not wanting to surrender. So he's still facing down on the ground. I'm on top of him, on his back, trying to gain control of his arms. I'm reaching around. I feel that I can't get it, so I try to transition. I move up his body. As soon as I do that, I hear a gunshot ring out from underneath us.
The worst possible scenario had just unfolded.
My first thought was, what was that? I then figured out he was firing a weapon.
It was at that point I realized, oh my God, he has a gun, and he's firing it at me and Officer Wallane. In that moment, a lot of things go through your mind. Time tends to slow down, and essentially that's when training kicked in. I realized that this guy is trying to effectively kill us.
Justin was trying to hold him, and I was trying to assist him, but I really didn't have anywhere to go, and Justin said, "I've been hit, I can't hold on any longer."
For both officers, those terrifying moments are forever etched in their minds.
I release him, I let him go, and I try to transition and grab my gun, because as he's firing at us, it's to that point where I need to return fire and end the threat. So as I reach for my gun, he turns around and he's facing me, and I see the barrel pretty much right in front of my eyes, and he pulls the trigger, and I see the muzzle flash, and I must have done one of these things, because like I said, it was right in front of my eyes, and the bullet, I remember the bullet hitting me on the side of the head. I remember the muzzle flash. I remember essentially the side of my head, it felt like it just exploded. I remember seeing blood squirt out like that. I don't remember seeing a whole lot out of that eye after that. I didn't hear anything after that. I just thought, well, I just got shot in the head. And I got to keep fighting because it's life or death at this point.
All available units start that way, 410 East 12.
Green route.
With a gunshot wound to the side of the head, a partial loss of sight and hearing, plus a concussion, Officer King still refuses to give up.
I'm thinking, okay, well, we gotta stop this. Yeah, I'm not gonna give up fighting. So he still has the gun in his hand, and I go after the gun. I go after his arm. I need to get that gun out of his hand, so I'm able to pin his arm to the ground while I'm still on top of him, and he's still struggling. He's still fighting, trying to get away.
At that point, the wounded officer realizes he has no other choice and asks his partner to do something that would forever change her life as well.
I know I'm losing consciousness. I can't hold on very long. And I tell Officer Wallene, she asked me, should I shoot him?
I don't recall even removing my pistol from my holster at all. I just remember having an arm on Justin's back and reaching over him. And he said, you know, he's shooting at us. I can't hold on any longer.
He still fights. Keeps trying to gain control of that hand with a gun.
So I shot, and he continued to fire.
We're still fighting over the gun. And so she shoots him again.
So I shot 2 more times. And Justin was kind of in and out of it at that point.
He's still fighting. And she puts another round into him, a third gunshot. And the fighting stopped. I remember he went limp, and
One man dead, one shaken officer holding the gun that killed him, and Justin King on the ground, realizing if he hadn't moved his head, he wouldn't be alive. He was just inches from death.
the next thing I remember, I'm on my back, and I see other officers around me, and it was a good sight to see. I knew that I was going to make it once I saw the other officers.
One of the first officers on the scene was Sergeant Tim Murphy.
The radio keyed up, and you could tell something was terribly wrong. We've all heard fights on the radio. If you get in a fight, you hear the radio key up, and you can tell somebody's fighting. This was something way worse than that. Where I was standing at, I was near the report writing room where everybody else was at writing reports, and you could hear the chairs get kicked back and everybody run down the hallway. So everybody kind of took off at the same time. There was a couple people there before me. I was maybe third, fourth. So I got to the top of the stairs, opened the kitchen door, and King was laying on his back, head towards the door. A lot of blood. Brenda had said over the radio that he was down. As I was getting out of my car, actually, I still remember she said he was down, Officer King's down. So I knew that there had been shots fired, and I knew he was down.
Even with all his years of experience, Tim Murphy was not fully prepared for what he saw.
I don't know, it's hard to explain. I never want to hear it again. I never want to go through it again. But as police officers, you have a job to do, and you got to take that information and just keep going. You just got to keep working. It sucks, when you walk in and see one of your friends laying there bleeding, but we still had a scene to secure. We had to take care of Brenda, we had to take care of Justin. We had evidence we had to secure. We had to get more resources there. I mean, there's still a lot of things to do while it's going on.
Tim had a friend who needed medical attention, and he needed it quickly.
I looked down at King, and I looked over at Brenda, and you could tell she was pretty shaken up. So I was talking to her while I was getting some gloves on, and then I just got down and was talking to King and put some pressure on his head, just trying to keep some pressure on the wound at that time.
I was obviously in shock. I remember everyone being there, and I remember them taking him out on the stretcher, and I remember seeing the deceased on the floor, and then I was escorted out, and the chief and the major and everyone came to the scene.
I remember telling him to open his eyes. When I first got there, his eyes were closed, and once I got down on the floor with him, his eyes opened up, and I could see he was looking around, and he was there. I remember at one point he closed his eyes, and I yelled at him, and he opened his eyes back up, and I was like, "Don't do that."
Sergeant Murphy then told Officer King the words Justin needed to hear.
I just remember talking to him and saying like, hey, we're here with you.
And then reality began to creep in to the sergeant's head.
It can kind of sneak its way in during the event, and you got to kind of block it out. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff you still have to get done. There's a lot of things that got to be checked off. I know when I was on the floor, it creeped into my head that he's got a baby due within a couple months. Like his wife's at home right now pregnant. Like that kind of hits you and you're like, whoa. And you kind of got to stuff it down a little bit, keep working. At one point, I was wondering where the hell the ambulance was at. Looking back now, I realized it was like 2 minutes, 3 minutes before fire and medic were there, but it felt like forever before they were there. So there's times where it creeps up on you and you just got to keep pushing it down and keep working because, I mean, he's hurt, Brenda's hurt. We got to get this taken care of.
That's right. While her husband was in a fight with a suspect that almost took his life, his pregnant wife was home sleeping, unaware any of this was happening.
317 is going to the hospital with 301.
I woke up to my phone going off and knocking on my front door. So right away I knew something bad had happened. And when I opened the door, it was his coworker, Chad. And he told me that Justin had been hurt and that he needed to take me to the hospital. And so he took me there very quickly.
When she got to the hospital, I think I was out getting scans or something on my head, and she was escorted to the emergency room where I had been, and I wasn't there. Nobody was really there. She just saw, I think, the bloody uniform on the floor. And the police chaplain was there just because of the nature of the incident. And she saw that, and she saw the chaplain, and she told me that she assumed the worst had happened.
For Kelsey, that terrifying moment of not knowing if her husband was dead or alive is something she will never forget.
Just in an empty ER room, I could see his uniform laying on the floor. There was some blood. His earpiece was there. And then the chief and the chaplain walked in. And that made me worry a little bit more. I thought they were coming to give me some bad news.
Kelsey's thoughts immediately turned to their unborn child.
Worried that, the unknown, not knowing what condition he was in, that possibly wouldn't have a father.
Thankfully, Kelsey didn't have to wait too long to be reunited with her husband.
Shortly after that, Justin was brought back into the room, and there were just a lot of people around. And then when I saw Justin, I just had this huge sense of relief that he was going to be fine.
She wasn't the only one getting that call. Brenda's husband, Ron, was also receiving a call that he hoped he would never take.
Well, it was a real calm and pretty morning. It was sunrise. I was out on a lake duck hunting. Not as much breeze as we wanted for the hunt, but we were just set up. It was that time of day. We were shooting hours were just about upon us, and the phone rang in the duck blind, which luckily my partner's phone did receive phone calls, but then my other partner's phone went off as well. And the first time they tried to answer, no one was there, but they could see that it was Brenda that was calling. So I immediately knew something was terribly wrong.
His intuition was correct. 30 years in law enforcement, as well as a stint in the Marines, still helped him keep a level head, but his heart couldn't be controlled.
I can remember when I left it to get to the hospital, my buddies were, all telling me, drive safe, don't speed. I go, there's no need for that. It's going to be an hour. And I guess my investigative side, police instincts kind of took over there too. I just told myself to remain calm, get yourself there safely. But I remember the one thought that stuck out in my mind as I was driving home was, this is a life-changing event. Sorry.
At the same time Kelsey was being driven to the hospital and Ron was driving there, the man in charge of the Davenport Police Department was also getting a call.
It's not unusual for me to get a phone call at 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning about a serious incident that happened. But I remember the phone call was from our station supervisor, and at that time he had very limited information, only that haven't talked about it in a while.
The tears are hard to contain as Chief Paul Sikorsky relives that night.
He just advised that one of our officers there was an officer-involved shooting, and that we did have an officer that was hurt, and very limited details at that time. A lot of things go through your head, not knowing the condition of
Chief Sikorsky knew he had to keep his composure when he saw Justin, no matter how serious the injuries were.
My role at that time was I really needed to go see how the officers were doing. So I responded to the hospital and was escorted in right away. And very, very thankfully, I was able to see Justin right away in the emergency room. It was prior to him being cleaned up at all. So, I was able to see him, talk to him. And it was very much a sense of relief at the time.
For the chief, his job was not just to make sure Justin would physically heal. He needed to check the emotional health of all the officers involved.
It was really good that I had a chance to see him right then. And I think it was good for him, and I think it was good for the other officers to have me there, but it was equally as good for me. I needed to see him in person and talk to him in person. And I also had a really blessed meeting with Brenda Wallin at the time as well.
Yes, Officer Brenda Wallin was there as well. Not only did she endure the trauma that came with the violent encounter, she was also the target of one of the gunman's bullets. The bullet holes in the sleeves of her uniform show she was also inches from death.
There was a lot of people affected by this. It wasn't just the people that were involved in that deadly incident. There were families involved, for everybody involved, the officers as well as the suspect in this. I often think of everything that everybody has had to go through because of this incident, this one night, this one morning, when somebody made the decision that they were going to try and take the life of one of our officers.
Officer Wallin has since retired from the police department. She still struggles with the decisions that she was forced to make on that horrific night, and she realizes she will never forget that encounter. She did try to return to police work, but quickly realized she couldn't do it.
Radio traffic, just sitting in the office would light me up. If the guys would go on a chase or if something crazy would happen, I was sitting up in the detective bureau where they were interviewing some, pretty high stake cases, and, just certain things would reactivate me, and I obviously had nightmares and was put on medication for anxiety and depression and my nightmares, and it affected me and my entire family.
Brenda says she misses her brothers and sisters in blue, and while she may no longer be on the force, she will always have their backs.
It has been a big part of my life. These people are my family. I started as a dispatcher, and I did that for 5 years. And then I became an officer in '99 and didn't want to retire. My actual retirement was 2021, so my hope was to make it till the end, but didn't happen that way.
Meanwhile, Justin King tries not to dwell on what might have been that night. Instead, he's just thankful for the outcome.
That's something obviously I think about more after the fact. It just kind of goes to show you how precious life is, and it's made me think about what's important in life. He's my only son. He was born a little over a month after the incident happened, and the thought of not being around for him, it's the worst feeling in the world thinking about that, but being a father, it's the greatest thing in the world, so very fortunate that I've gotten to experience that.
Justin King's role with Davenport PD has changed since that fateful night. He's now in the detective unit and specializes in investigating property crimes. He says while he will never forget the incident that almost took his life, he will also always remember the kindness shown to his family in the days following his close call.
This community, it's always been, in my opinion, very supportive of law enforcement. I think a lot of them understand the jobs that we do isn't always easy. It's not always fun for us. But I think a lot of it that gets lost is the fact that we're humans too. We can be hurt, we have feelings, we have families, and we're just like anyone else. At the end of the day though, we're here for you.
Brenda and Justin forged a bond that night that both say will never be broken.
6 weeks after the shooting took place, Officer King and his wife had their first baby, and I received a message from him with a picture that said, "Because of you, this moment was made possible."
While Brenda says she can't return to the police department, she is ready to find a new career.
I'm actually kind of out on the job hunt. I'm kind of not ready for retirement yet, and so I'm kind of looking for something to do, something that I can do that I can help people.
And when asked if he could go back to that day when his life was threatened and his world was changed, Justin says he'd do it all over again, even if the outcome wasn't the same.
I honestly believe that's why I was here, why I was put on this earth. It's something that I enjoy doing. It's worthwhile. Had I not survived that encounter, I'd be at peace with that, because it is a righteous calling, and I'm okay with that.